Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Meira Blaustein. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Woodstock Film Festival. And so welcome to the online series, Virtual Films and Conversation. The festival began back in mid-March due to COVID-19. And this is, I believe, our 12th conversation. We've done so many already in the past. And we have a couple coming up, one on Thursday with Fisher Stevens, and we'll talk about Tiger King and so many more films that he has produced, directed, starred in. And next week we have Oren Moverman and Ira Sachs and Bill Horberg. So come back and join us for all these wonderful talks. But right now, I'm so thrilled that we have Blair Breard and Alice Wu to talk about The Half of It, Netflix film that premiered May 1st. So Alice and Blair, come on and join us, please. Hello, you guys. Hi, Alice. Hi, Blair.
Hi.
So nice to see you too.
Hi, Meira.
Hi. Hello.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. I think I spoke with Blair about the making of The Half of It, maybe starting at least a year ago when she was working still on locations. So fast forward about a year after, you have accepted Best Narrative Award at the Tribeca Film Festival, and the film premiered on Netflix. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. You both should be very proud of it. And so nice to see you now in person, Alice. So,
thank you.
And hello, Blair.
Hi.
Blair is one of those Dynamo New York producers who is probably right now juggling a bunch of other productions while we're talking. Blair, is that so?
I'm actually juggling my son's internet connection because I think he's making this connection unstable. I'm texting him to please stop.
Yes, please, because I can't hear you well enough, and I want everybody to hear you well.
Well, there's also, it's 7 o'clock, so everybody outside is yelling and screaming and banging.
Right, that's right. And that's going to last for a couple of minutes. I know. Sorry to take you away from that.
No.
So in the meantime, I'm going to ask Alice. So Alice, you have had a number of careers. Filmmaking was not where you started. And you made two incredible narrative films, one, and they're both 15 years apart. I'm going to ask you this question. What took you so long?
Fair.
I mean, these are all, both of them are incredibly strong, very feminist, provocative, beautiful films. And you have taken 15 years in between one and the other. Can you talk a little bit about that very long hiatus? And before you do that, I want to tell you there's a film, Deborah Granick, who's a wonderful independent filmmaker.
Yes.
She also takes a while between films. Never 15 years, but also a number of years. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. No, first of all, thank you for saying those nice things. It's funny because at the point, like with both those films, at the point I was writing them, I don't think it occurred to me that those films were ever going to get made, right? Like when I was writing Saving Face, I was a computer scientist. I knew nothing about film. As you'll find out in the story, I left the industry 10 years ago to take care of my mom. And so by the point I was writing The Half of It, it was the first time I'd written in like 6 or 7 years. And I was just writing for myself. So I don't think of it, like at the point I'm writing anything, I tend to write from a very personal, emotional place. And I'm not thinking about what is the statement that will be made, because I don't think anyone's going to see this at all. Like I'm just, I think for me, it's maybe my way of how to understand the world. And maybe my place in it. But yeah, I think I love that somehow my name is getting, like, at least when you said is linked with Deborah Granick, because I'm so in awe. But I guess for me, I just, like when Saving Face got made, and for those of you who don't know that film, it's like an Asian American lesbian romantic comedy of manners that's half in Mandarin Chinese. It was a tiny budget. Like, who the hell thought that movie was going to get made 15 years ago? Like, today, maybe, right? But 15 years ago, that's crazy. So when it happened, I just wasn't prepared. Like, I think, and I think this is still true of me. I'm not really someone who thinks, well, I'm a filmmaker. What film shall I make is not the way I think about things. I think if I love a project, I will like move heaven and earth to try and get it made the way I want it made. But if I don't feel any need to make a film. Like, I don't feel, there's plenty of great content out there, and there's like plenty of amazing new voices. Like, there's actually no need for me to go be like, oh, let me, so I think that sort of drives me a bit, where I have to just love the story. And when Saving Face was done, I was so startled when everyone was like, what's next? And I was like, I don't know. And so I was kind of just reacting to what the market was sending me. And at that time, it was mainly big sort of romantic comedies with all mainstream cast, pretty much, well, not pretty much, entirely just white. And I actually love, I watch a lot of those movies. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what the industry mainly was. And I had fun like doing some work for hire. I sold a TV pitch that all 4 networks wanted to buy, and we went with ABC. But in the process, I think I was sort of just losing touch with what made me excited about storytelling to begin with. But then a sort of critical thing happened, which is that my mom had a major health issue. And when that happened, I sort of dropped everything to go to San Francisco for what I thought would be like a few weeks. And it just became clear after a while that it would really be best if I just stayed here. And I think when something really critically important happens to you, it makes all your priorities incredibly obvious, right? Like, if that hadn't happened, sure, maybe I just still, because I enjoy writing. I actually love directing, but not more than I love my family, or not more than I love the people who matter in my life. And I think, it was just a very easy choice in a weird way, where I just came up here after about 8 or 9 months. I remember this because one of my agents called me and was like, what is happening? Are you coming back? And I was like, no, I moved to San Francisco. And I remember she was like, okay, so you're on hiatus. And I was like, yes. But in my head, I thought I've left the industry. I was 39 at the time. And I was like, well, that's all right. It's my 20s were about computer science. My 30s were about this crazy ass dream where I got to make a film, and then I got to bumble around the industry for a while. And my 40s will be about my family. And that felt right, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I just got, well, a few things happened, but one, I sort of got pulled back into the industry by a studio exec friend who out of the blue wrote me to be like, hey, are you still writing? And she basically she had a job at DreamWorks Animation. She convinced me to pitch for that gig. I got it. I ended up having a great time writing for her because I didn't write at all for 7 years. And then I wrote that, and after that I was like, oh, I should maybe write my second film. But even then I was like, it's probably not going to get made. I don't even have agents. And also in that moment, because I started writing it a little over 3 years ago, Trump had just been elected. It was just before Hollywood had where diversity became quite such a big buzzword, where I didn't know it was about to happen. So I also thought, well, I'm making the main character a Chinese immigrant, and there are all these themes here. I'm like, this thing is definitely indie. It's going to take me years to get this made. But the big surprise was that at the point I went out with the script, we were just on the cusp of I think there's rumblings in the industry where people were starting to look for new stories. I honestly think a lot of that came from TV. I think a lot of the really most interesting stories were happening on TV, which was starting to bleed over into streamers and I mean, that's my guess. And yeah, so then that's how that happened.
Okay, thank you. Blair.
Sure.
So I don't think you have done teenage dramedies before. You have done comedies, plenty. Definitely some dramas. What tell me how you and Alice connected. I know that you love the film. We've spoken about it many times, and I know why you love it, because it's wonderful. But tell me a little bit about how you and Alice connected, and what is it about the half of it that pulled you into it? Blair.
So I have known a producer called Anthony Bregman for many, many years. He's another of the, great producers in New York. We've been friends forever, but have never worked together. And he had his hands in several pies, and he said, I've got this amazing script. You should read it. I'm looking for someone to work with me on it. And I read the script, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was so intelligent and sort of beautifully balanced in the writing. It was soulful and emotional and compassionate and funny. And I had never made anything in the sort of, high school coming of age. And I'm not sure I've worked on anything that has like no sex or drugs or curse words. So, but I just fell in love with the story and the writing. And I read it immediately. I called Anthony the next day and I said, I got to work on this with you. I love this project. Alice and I met, I think, a day or two later, and we just sat down, and it was just, there were other people at the table, but Alice and I just couldn't stop talking. And, we shared a lot of sensibilities, and I just felt like I immediately understood something about her that I couldn't really, I'm not sure if I could articulate it at the time, but I just thought, I really want to work with this person. I want to help this person execute her vision. I don't care what the budget is. I don't care what the limitations are. I just felt like this was a great fit for me. And I really wanted to work with Alice after meeting her. Turned down some other stuff that was bigger, but this was it just was so finely calibrated in the writing. And so that's how we met.
And when did Netflix come in?
I think Netflix was already.
I actually, before I brought on producers, I had found financing. I ended up having three financing.
More than one thing. Alice does many things. So she was already there. She was already at Netflix, and
okay.
Yeah, I chose Netflix, and then I found, I met with a bunch of producers. Ant and I clicked, but Ant said, listen, I have my fingers in a lot of pies. And so one of the things we talked about is like needing a right-hand person, and he was like, listen, I will make sure you actually have like a seasoned producer who will be next to you, because he's off with like 5 films. So he's there, but he's not there. Right. Like I met a few people, and with Blair, it was exactly like she said. We met at a Le Pen Quotidien somewhere in the Upper West Side. No one else had shown up. We were the only 2 people who showed up on time. So we just like talked. And I just was such a fan of, this is the woman who did Pootie Tang and The Louie Show and Better Things, which is one of her shows, and One Mississippi. And like, it just goes kind of on and on. But I also distinctly remembered something she said to me. Maybe it was the first thing she said about the script, where she liked her. She's like, I just really love that the script is so kind. And I love that was the first word she used to describe it, because I think that's something I really wanted to come through, but you don't know if it will or not, right? And I thought, okay, I think she understands the movie I'm making. Like, she didn't say it's super fun, it's going to be like a big, broad high school, wham bam, because it could be, right? It could have been, and that would be great. That was just not the movie I was making.
Interesting.
The other thing is that Alice is very, very clear in what she wants. Even if she doesn't know the answer to certain things, she's very clear about what she wants. And there's nothing general about the way Alice works, or the way Alice, I'm talking about you like you're not even there, but there's nothing general about the way you work as a director. You're extremely specific, And that is really, as a producer, that's what you want. You want someone who knows what they want, even if they're not sure how to articulate it. And actually, Alice is very, very capable of articulating it. But it just was a relief to know that she knew what she wanted and she knew what she didn't want. Because it's, as a producer, when you're working with someone who's really indecisive and isn't really sure, that's what makes the job hard. The jobs are always hard. They're wonderful and complicated and easy and funny and strange and all kinds of things, but you just want someone who has the ability to make decisions and has some specific understanding of what they want to get from what the film is.
And for a second-time director, it's particularly impressive, I have to say. Again, as if she's not there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so ladies, there are a lot of questions from attendees. So I'm going to start getting to some of them. And for those of you attendees whose questions I'm not able to get to, please forgive me. We just won't be able to get to everybody, but I'll do my best. So Alice, I noticed that you used Anton Sacco in both of your films as the composer for the film. And I love Anton, he's fantastic. So Alice Wang is asking a question for Alex. Do you write with music in mind?
Well, okay, there are two ways to answer that. It's actually with this script, I actually have literally scripted in If You Leave Me Now by Chicago. So clearly I did, like there's certain things I specifically was like, oh, I'd love that song. But for the most part, I'm aware that you want to wait till you get to post and you see what you have. And then honestly, because I never write in a budget that's big enough where I could have my choice of songs, it's always going to be finding a far less expensive way to recreate the sound I want. So I usually can't write in a song. That was just a one exception. But that said, I almost always write to music. So there's usually music that doesn't have words, actually. So it's usually going on while I'm writing because I'm trying to, like there's a certain kind of emotional velocity that I want my film to have, right? And I think even in the read, because I am a firm believer that if you're not feeling anything when you're writing something, there's zero chance anyone else is feeling anything, right? And most of the stuff I write, I don't feel anything. I'm mostly like, this is terrible. Who wrote this? This is the worst thing ever. And then out of nowhere, sometimes something clicks, right? And then I'm like, ah. And so like the hope is that, and I do find that music helps me get there, probably because and in fact, I even say this to like my creative heads, or I often will be like, wait, do they hear, well, I'll use the term like, or I'll reference, I'll be like, oh, I don't think that person heard the music, meaning I don't think they, they're getting the emotional tenor of this thing. So I hope that answers her question.
Yes, thank you. And let's just give another shout out to Anton, who is...
Yes, actually, I quickly wanted to say, sorry, because I answered the question. I want to say I love Anton. And funnily enough, this morning I kept trying to post on my Instagram something for Anton, and Instagram kept not accepting it and saying, we can't post right now. But Anton's been with me through both films. We became really close friends. Actually, he's one of my favorite people in the universe. So even though he was really, I should probably have chosen a composer in New York because that would have been what would work for our budget, and it's just easier because I like to work with people relatively closely. But I mean, Anton's in LA now and we know each other, and I love him. I think he's a genius. He's like one of the nicest people ever. And I was really lucky that he was willing to do this film as well. He just seemed to really get it, and he was excited about it. And along with him and my music supervisor, Tracy McKnight, but then also we somehow lucked out and got an amazing music editor, Susanna Parrish, who usually does huge films, but is sometimes willing to do like little films just because she loves them. And Susanna was really helpful given that Anton was further away and sort of helping us all bridge that.
I love Tracy McKnight too. So you're talking about among my favorite people. I have a question from an anonymous attendee. And I think I'm going to try and put it to the two of you, even though it's for Alice. And I'm going to depart a little bit from, most of the questions are about the substance of the film and the craftsmanship of the film. But this one is about how did you get to Netflix? And I'm putting it out to both of you. Alice, how did you pitch to Netflix? That is the question. And Blair, I know that you and I spoke about how great it was to work with Netflix, and Netflix is now, you know, one of the absolute top aggregators of film content that there is. So I wonder if you, Blair, can then take this on and talk a little bit about your work with Netflix, because you have worked with other television station companies, as well as, of course, other distributors. So if you can just talk about your experience with Netflix after Alice talks about how she got to Netflix.
Well,
So Netflix.
Actually, go Blair if you want to, because yeah, why don't you go ahead so that because I know
Okay, so
Blair was
we'll go backwards.
the head of all of that. Yeah,
we'll go backwards into it. So Netflix was already on board, and I had never worked with them before. I've worked with Amazon and FX and all kinds of people, most studios I've worked with. Everybody's got their own thing. But Netflix is a streamer, and they've got their own way of doing things, and they're very helpful, and they're very supportive. In the beginning, they were so hands-on that, you know, they were like, what can we do to help? Let's schedule a phone call with the 9 people in this department, and so we can figure out what to do to help you. And after like 40 of those, I was like, you have to just like stop scheduling phone calls so we can just go make the movie, because we don't have time to have all these phone calls. But I will say that they were absolutely incredible to work with. They were so supportive. They were incredibly supportive of Alice's vision. They understood what our obstacles were. They were involved when we needed them to be involved. They were hands-off when we wanted them to be hands-off. And as someone who really came up in the indie world, I'm just like, why do I have to talk to anybody except Alice? I don't want to talk to anybody except the filmmaker. But by the time we started shooting, I just was like, okay, I have to stop behaving as if they are not helping us, because they helped us the entire time. I felt like they were great partners. They really wanted Alice to have what she needed to realize her vision. I was very, very, I always start out very suspicious of studio involvement. It's just the way I'm wired. And they were amazing. I mean, I would work with them in a heartbeat over and over again, because I do feel like they absolutely got what the film needed, what was important, what our obstacles were, and how to solve the problems. They were amazing partners. Okay. Really amazing on every level.
Yeah. And I think I echo everything Blair said in terms of what they were amazing partners, but I also have to thank Blair, because she basically sheltered me from a lot, because I can't handle 20 million meetings that aren't about the creative of the film. Like we were in pre-production, so much was happening. And I think Blair would just funnel what was necessary for me to like answer or say, but she was in like constant meetings with like 30 people on a line. And I think eventually it was all for the good. But it was, as a filmmaker, it was great to be able to have that kind of setup where I knew what was important. And it was like a minimal in terms of the amount of bureaucracy I might have to go through. And then for me, so the interesting thing is, as you in your first question, you pointed out, I had left the industry. So, between my 2 films, so I had not really been tracking what was happening. And at the point I wrote my second film, I basically finished the second draft, which eventually turned out to be the draft we shot, but I'd sent it to my writing group, and they were just like, it's great, send it out. And I knew nobody. Like I knew I still had some old friends from the industry, but I didn't, I had not been in the industry. So I just sent it to a few of them, just saying like, hey, just curious what you think. And I was very lucky that they all were like, oh my God, hey. And then they all within days wrote me to be like, I really love this. And then they just sort of slipped it around. And within like 4 or 5 months, like that was maybe in February, and by Memorial Day like, yeah, I guess it's like 3 months later, I had like 3 different financing possibilities. One was Netflix. I was actually a little bit dubious about Netflix at the time because I had not been in the industry. So everyone was like, it's the big game in town. And I was like, I mean, I don't want to say the names of the original films at that time, but I just didn't know hardly any of them. And then this is before Roma had come out, before Private Life had come out. This is even before To All the Boys I've Loved Before came out, right? Like all these like fun, great films or very deep, important films. And so I hardly ever watched any Netflix original films. And I thought like, it just generally at that time, no one knew what was happening. But the conventional wisdom seemed to be if you went to Netflix, more people might see your film, or it might just disappear into a morass of like Office episodes or something where no one finds your film at all. But there'd also somehow the inference there's less cachet, right? Because my other 2 possibilities, one would have been a specialty theatrical distributor, and it would have meant theatrical, and another would have been private financing, and it would have meant going to the festivals. To me, because that's what I'd known, that felt more like I felt like, well, we should definitely do that. But in talking to friends, and then to be totally honest, the execs that just responded so strongly were so great. Like, well, the head of that division took me out to dinner and just was like, why did you write this? And because I'd written it, like just as Trump had been elected, and there were certain things I was trying to say, and because I was thinking about hoping that someone in like a rural town, maybe more of a red state, might watch this. I was sort of talking about these things, and she was like, we'll make sure those people know about the film, and it was just this like moment where I was like, oh, more people, like there's no chance those people are going to a landmark theater, right, to watch a movie like this. So maybe I get more cachet, but the film is going to be seen by a far smaller percentage. And so at the time, I ended up making the choice for that reason. But then the thing that worked out for me is that then all these like incredible films are starting to come out of Netflix. So now, I honestly don't know. Like maybe there's still a little bit more cachet if you come out on a specialty theatrical. But it's hard to say because it does seem like there's plenty of cachet if your film is good. So it's just, I think it has a little bit more to do, like on Netflix. So I think it has a little bit more to do people find it, and is there a good word of mouth? But I certainly would say I would totally still make that trade-off of cachet for the fact that people, it seems like, are finding it. Like people are telling me their conservative uncle in New Hampshire has out of the blue told them, I just saw this movie and you should see it. And, and that's what I was hoping for. So
a lot of people have already seen it. I know that for a fact. Blair, was it supposed to come out theatrically before COVID? Or,
It was, and I think that was something, Alice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Netflix kind of surprised us and said that they were going to give it a theatrical release, which was fantastic thing. And then we had COVID, and of course the film was in the Tribeca Film Festival, which we were really excited about, to see it in a festival at that theater too. And then COVID happened, and so there's been no theatrical release. But it was really like an unexpectedly generous surprise that they said, it's we're going to do a theatrical release for the film. It was great news.
It was. I literally remember. I think it was 11 o'clock at night. Oh, sorry, 11 o'clock at night, I got a call from my exec, Nikita Maddox, being like, hey, can you talk? And I was like, sure. And she was like, okay, we're going to tell you this officially tomorrow. But, the film turned out really well. We want to give it a theatrical. And I literally could not stop jumping up and down. Like I was just, because I didn't even ask for it. Because I thought, this would never happen. Because there's like no, I believe our 3 actors are going to be stars. But at the moment, they're still fresh faces, right? Or at the point we're going on, I'm not well known. So I'm like, this is not the film that usually gets that kind of, it's expensive to do a theatrical. But Nikita was like, yeah, she pushed for it. And like, it seems like there are a lot of fans at Netflix and they were like, we want to do it. And, it's a bummer that it hasn't happened, but on the other hand, it's like, it's so important that we all stay quarantined that it's fine. Like I live with that, but I just love that they had that, I don't know, like as Blair said, it was generous and it made me because I was already terrified that like I was like, oh my god, this movie's gonna come out, I'm gonna get eviscerated by critics, lesbians are gonna have like mass disappointment, it's just gonna be a disaster. So it was actually really kind of a relief that like, well, at least my distributor likes the film. So
we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and just go through them. And most of them, if not all, are about the substance of the film. So from Kayla Lewis, she's asking for Alice. I was wondering what drew you to Cyrano and how you were able to add your own personal touch in the writing of the adaptation. Thank you for making this wonderful film.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kayla. So I didn't start off thinking I wanted to do a Cyrano adaptation. I started off, actually it was about me trying to figure out how to, I think we live in a world that tends to exalt romantic love. And I think that the stuff that I write for myself to direct tends to come, again, from a very personal place. And I think like the way Saving Face is really about, like, it's not a traditional romantic comedy. It's about how, can a woman have both romance and her family at the same time in an authentic way, right? I think this film started from me trying to understand something about platonic relationships, but specifically because I was realizing that I've had, of course I've had some heartbreaks that are romantic, right? But if I'm really honest, probably some of the biggest heartbreaks I've had were not romantic at all. Like they're the heartbreaks between a parent and a child, or they're the heartbreaks between best friends, right? And this was, I wanted to sort of write a story about like what happens in the sort of lesbian straight guy friendship, where it's sort of interesting because no one wants to have sex with anyone else. Like it's not that kind of a story, but yet there's an intimacy. And I'm not sure our society always knows what to do with that, right? It's like, well, if you're a man, you're a woman, and you like click so well, why wouldn't you just get married and be together for the rest of your lives? So I was starting to like go through that process, and somewhere in it, because it's supposed to be kids in their 20s, or kids, young adults in their 20s. And at a certain point I was like, I should just set this in high school, because if it's a movie, I have like 100 minutes to get from the beginning to the end, and it's hard for me to come up with an ending, or I just couldn't come up with an ending and that for that 20-something best friends that felt both satisfying and earned. Like I could come up with an ending that was like, wow, that was like very satisfying, but it kind of feels unreal. Or I could come up with one that's like, that feels real, but what a bummer, and neither thing felt like that's what I wanted to do. So that's when I was like, if I set this thing in high school, the really wonderful thing about high school is it's a time of life when most of us went to high school. So I think most of us have a strong emotional tie to that time. And I actually do believe that, I honestly think I could have set this story in a nursing home. It could be like 80-year-olds, right? But if you're 80 and you have to go ask your crush out, I bet you feel like you're 15. And I think so that time is very, like, it's just very tender and specific. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's often when you're having an emotion in high school, it's the first time you've had that emotion, right? So it can then feel like it's the last time you're going to have that emotion. You're like, I'm in love with that person. If I don't get that person, I'm dying alone, right? Like it's like that extreme. And so when you have that kind of emotional heightening, you can cover a lot of emotional territory very quickly, and it makes it easier to come up with a movie that felt like, okay, I think I can get to an ending here that feels like we went on this journey, and that I can leave the audience with a sense of sort of both completion and satisfaction. And in the process, I started being like, oh, what was I like in high school? And I wasn't out to myself as gay at the time. And I was like, well, it's not like I would literally go ask a girl out. Like that would never happen. And that's when I started thinking about I was like, oh, Cyrano would lend itself really well to this. Because the reality is, I had a crush. I wasn't out to myself. I had a crush on the same girl in high school for all 3 years of high school. And if you told me that I could have used some handsome guy and puppeted that guy to reach the girl that where I could be so safe and she wouldn't know who I was, and I could connect that girl, I would have done it in a heartbeat. There's something so delicious about that, right? So I think there's a level of wish fulfillment in that. And so it had a lot to do with being realistic with myself that like I was not this like suave, I'm also still not a suave person, but I was definitely not in high school. So how can I construct that and still sort of deal with these themes? And so that's sort of where it came from.
Okay. Thank you. Beck Underwood is asking, and no surprise, she's asking about the animation aspect of the film because she's an animator. So she says, I loved your use of animation in the opening of the film and other graphic notes in the movie. Can you speak to your own interest in animation? And also, was animation in your mind during the writing process and or during the editing part of the craftsmanship?
Yes, it was written as an animation. I will say that when I write, maybe because I know I'm directing it, I purposely leave out a lot of the visual things I'm thinking of because I think it slows down your read. So when I'm writing, I'm trying to keep you on an emotional journey, right? Like the goal is to keep you emotionally with me. So I don't, unless it's critically important, I usually don't stop and say like, start describing something that you're seeing because I think it can just sort of take you out of it. But the whole first page and a half was always animation. And initially I just like wrote something, thought like, well, we'll figure it out. Initially there were going to be all these like paintings referenced, and then quickly, Blair and I talked about it. It's like, this is going to be really expensive. But in terms of by the time I finally met an animator in post, at that point, I was very lucky to, like, I met a bunch of people, and finally, like Haley Morris from Shape, and I think her company is Shape and Shadow. She's brilliant and amazing. And she was the first person where we just clicked. And she said, because I knew the whole first part of it. I was very influenced by William Kentridge. And she was immediately like, okay, I get it. It's like, okay, I want charcoal to come out. I want the charcoal to crush. And she didn't necessarily specifically do the William Kentridge style, but she got that. And then I was like, I want the page to rip in half. And then I want the page to crumple down. And she was like, let's do 2.5D, where like when the page rips in half, like, because I was like, okay, we'll literally see a page rip in half. But then she started talking about how she could do stop motion after that. And the fact that she was able to do that was really exciting. So then I was like, great, well then here are these like moments that are in the film, that are already seated in the film. And then let's, so I basically wrote that out. And then she was just incredible how fast she was. And I think she does this amazing job. And like seeing what she was able to do, it was like this wonderful collaboration where she'd be like, well, what if I did this? And then that would unlock for me like, okay, then the story will be this, right? Like it was very much a conversation. And I think we got to, I feel, because the whole thing initially, even before we shot the film, I was always secretly hoping, and we embed little things inside the movie, that, like Aster, the painting that she's drawn, that was always I always wanted to hearken to that in the animation. Like the painting that she gives Ellie for Paul, and it's that flower. Like the fact that you don't know when you're watching the animation, but when you see that thing given, it should give you a moment of like, oh, that's interesting, right? But also when she's first sketching, if you were to watch super closely, she's actually sketching Plato's Symposium about two souls being ripped apart, right? Like it's very subtle, but for someone's very sharp eyes, my hope is that they might watch the animation. There's potentially a suggestion that could have been Aster's, it could have been Aster's submission to art school. And again, do I need people to know that? No, I don't. But do I think sometimes my thinking that might help a film feel more of a piece? I do. Like, I don't think you need to know. I think you feel, though, that things are thought about and that they're integrated.
Blair, were you involved in the animation in any way as part of your creative producing?
Well, I was involved in having many conversations with Alice about it. and it's obvious from Alice, listening to Alice talk about it, how clear she is about what she wants and what she's thinking and how all the pieces are there. I mean, she has thought through everything. And it's, and there's so many different styles of animation. We looked for people, we got samples from people, and it was really just about finding the person who she connected with, who could really execute, the ideas in her head. There's a lot of incredibly talented people who are doing animation, but it was who's the person who's going to do Alice's animation that's in her head. But as you can hear, I mean, Alice really is so thorough in her thinking about every single aspect of the film. There isn't one piece of the film that Alice hadn't thought through in an incredibly thorough and meticulous way. Alice is the hardest working director I think I've ever worked with. And,
thank you.
And that's really a pleasure. You know, even when you can't do things or find the right things, or you've got obstacles, it's just like having someone who really understands what they want and has really put in the time to think about it is just a joy. It's a joy. So the animation was there from the beginning, and it was important from the beginning. We talked about it a lot. And even if we didn't have the finished animation before we started shooting, there was a lot of care taken with how is it, even if we don't have it, how are we going to thread that through with Astor's painting, with other pieces, so that even if the animation came later, it still felt holistic and of a piece. And it really had happened, because even if we didn't get it done before we started shooting, I understood what Alice wanted it to feel like and how important it was to connect it to the film. So that was something we really paid attention to. It wasn't an afterthought, which is why I think it works so well. It's beautiful, the animation.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I have a lot of questions. Gigi Simon, who used to be the New York State Film Commissioner, is asking kind of a location question. Gigi asks, I'm curious about your creative process, Alice. When choosing where to set the film, why did you pick such a rural environment for that particular story?
Yeah, you know, as I mentioned, I finally started writing this story. Trump had been elected. I, like almost everyone I knew, was stunned. And I remembered, because I was just starting to outline this story in my head, and I had this moment where I'm like, because this, honestly, the story could be set in a huge high school in like suburban New Jersey or in Westchester and Orange County, right? It could be like a big high school film, like a Bring It On kind of a thing. But that's not what I wanted to make. But specifically, my mind was so much on trying to figure out, like, I mean, it wasn't like I was, like, it's not like I didn't know that, yes, as a country, we struggle with, you know, sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia. It's like I knew that we have those things, but maybe because in the course of my life, it felt like things were getting better. And I'd sort of maybe bought into this idea that, you know, like those things are still there, and they're still there in me, right? Like, even though I'm an Asian lesbian, I still have like xenophobic and sexist and racist and homophobic attitudes that are unconscious, and they come up, and I always have to be like, oh, you know, and they come up less and less over time because I work on them. But my assumption is that we're all working on it, and we all accept that it's an important thing to work on. And to suddenly have this moment where it felt like our whole country was like retreating to different corners and pointing fingers at each other, it was just startling to be like, oh, there's like sections of, you know, Americans who don't seem to think that that's an important thing to work on. I actually feel quite resentful about being asked to work on that. And I think it probably part of the reason I was so depressed about it is it really forced me to confront, you know, like I want to believe, like maybe there's like Santa Claus or something, but I want to believe that most people are fundamentally good. You know, like I think it comes out in my films. I don't really have villains per se. I just have a lot of flawed people, but they're all trying to do what they think is the right thing, right? And the reasons they're failing have more to do with their humanity and less to do with like being bad. But this felt bad. It just felt like, how can this not be bad? But then my next thought was like, so I'm not sure I'm ready to just write off sections of the country and be like, only bad people live there, right? Like that just felt reductive in a way that I couldn't wrap my brain around. And so somewhere in there, I started thinking about, I started thinking about the fact that I grew up in a very conservative Chinese family. And my parents are wonderful. They're like, they've grown so much since. But when I was growing up, they were very openly, like they're young immigrants here, they're very openly racist and sexist and homophobic. But they're really, really good people, right? And so I think that made me go, I think it is possible to be a good person and still have an attitude that could hurt someone. And then I thought, well, I think I should just set this in a rural town, right? Like that might be my way. I'm not a message movie maker, so I don't want to hit, it's not like I make a big point of it. No one makes a big like speech against Trump or anything in the film. But I did want to sort of find the humanity in all of these people. And I think Paul really, like that character really shows that, like we spend most of the film falling in love with him and then he breaks our heart at a certain point, right? And I think that's critical for me. And then to watch how he reaches past himself to grow because of the love he feels for his friend. And I think that was why setting it in Eastern Washington State, which is where it set, made sense to me, partly because I lived in Washington State in my 20s. But the other thing is I didn't think I could set in the South because then I would have to be thoughtful about how I commented on black-white race relations. And I wasn't prepared to comment well on that, and I didn't want to like be blind to it. And so, yeah, I thought, and there's something about Eastern Washington State where it's just far enough away from things that it felt believable. But then we didn't have the budget to shoot in Washington State and fly the crew there. And I spent a number of days driving around with Blair. Well, first with my locations manager, and then Blair and the locations manager, and then literally a minibus of like, as more and more people joined, like driving all over the place. But the first couple of days, it was just me and a locations manager. The whole point was to be like, could you see the set in upstate New York? And after those 2 days of driving around, I was like, yeah, a lot of this terrain actually looks like what, I would need. And upstate New York happens to, even politically fit a lot of what the Senate. So that's why.
Okay, I have a couple of questions that I'm going to put together. They seem to be an extension of the other. So Nicholas Bluestein is asking, I would love to know for Alice, what triggered the transition from software design to filmmaking, and if you find any similarities between those two career paths. And an anonymous attendee is asking, are you considering doing any project related to women in the tech industry in the future? And that he read that you used to work in Microsoft, and you almost had a series about this particular issue many years ago. So if you can address the whole tech part in your life.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer to the first question is just simply, I'd never occurred to me I'd be a filmmaker. Like, that didn't even seem something that'd be possible for someone like me. I just, I was in my late 20s when the first internet boom hit. And I went from working 100 hours a week to working I still had to go into work, but no one knew how to monetize the internet. So we were all just sitting around in our offices and having these extremely boring, marketing meetings. And I finally, because I was so bored, took a night class at the University of Washington Extension's program that just fed into a screenplay writing class. And because I'd made friends over this weekend workshop, I just took the class, and I ended up writing Saving Face in that class. You wrote 2 nights a week. I think I'm project focused. I didn't think I wished to be a filmmaker. It was more like once I had the script, I just suddenly, what happened is someone, my instructor in that class was actually like, oh, I'd like to option this. And I was like, I don't know what that means. But once he talked about well, I'd go sell it, but just so you know, it's not going to be Chinese, not going to be gay. It'll definitely be white, probably won't get made. There's a money play. And I was like, I think hearing that immediately made me go, oh my God, that would crush me if I saw this being made in a way that I have a very specific idea of and so it's almost out of that I'm like, I gotta go try and make this thing. He was like, okay, if you want to try and get it made, you gotta quit your job. You gotta learn what it takes to direct this thing. You gotta move to New York or LA immediately. And so 6 weeks later, I moved to New York, and I saved enough money. And so that's again where I was lucky, because I've been financially self-sustaining since I was 18. And I'm terrified of debt. I think it's an immigrant thing. Like, I'm really terrified of debt. So had I was lucky that I'd happened to pick a career that exploded and gave me a nest egg. So effectively, it's like I was able to, like, I was like, all right, I can live on $40,000 a year for 5 years. End of 5 years, if I haven't made the film, I still have 6 to 8 months to find a job, right? And that felt like odds that seemed like, okay, at least I won't go destitute. And that's what happened. So there's that. And then in terms of women in tech, maybe, I think there's a time I was really interested in telling that story that may come back again, but I don't think it'll be because I want to tell a story about women in tech. I think it'll probably be more out of there's some emotional thing I want to explore, that the actual structure of women in tech would allow me to explore that emotional thing.
Makes sense. Liesl Escalon is asking, and this is again kind of location question. Has that hot spring that Alex and Leah had their deep conversation and interlude become a landmark the way the bench in Amsterdam did for the Fault in Our Stars? Do you have a map of the locations that you filmed in New York State for fans of the film to visit post-COVID?
Well, can I answer that, Alice?
Yes, I'm expecting you to.
We will never reveal the location of the hot springs. They are secret. They are a secret hot springs. And one of the amazing things about shooting in New York State is that you can find anything you need and anything you want. You just have to have a great team. You have to have a great support team and great departments who are working with you. So the hot springs, I'm sorry to say, will remain hidden and secret. I can tell you where because if we gave the location, it would just be overrun and it would ruin the natural beauty and mystery of it. I think you have to just discover that by accident in your explorations in your life. You can go to, we can tell you where the train station was and other places, but it really, the thing about making movies, and I think it happens in a lot of cases, is that you create the magic and the mystery by piecing things together and, figuring out the beginning, the middle, and the end. Location-wise, you can be in many different places, and the challenge is for it to feel like it's all one. But we can never reveal the secret hot springs location. Sorry.
Okay.
I love that.
Another substance question from Theodore Karamanolis, and I hope I didn't change your last name by accident. He's asking, I'd like to ask about the implementation of Plato's symposium ideas in the film. Was the half of it inspired by it, or did the connection come as a later development stage? And he's also asking about the importance of the archetypes of the classic texts, such as Symposium and Cyrano, in contemporary narratives in general.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it wasn't inspired by the Symposium. I was already outlining the story, but as I was doing it, it became clear to me that this is really about a girl who has to use other people's words. I mean, she's writing papers for her classmates, but she's also using other people's words to describe love, right? And like, they're all from classic texts that she's read. And her journey is really like how she starts there, and finally by the end of the movie, she finally figures out how to use her own words to describe love. However inelegantly she does it, it's finally her own, right? And I think that's really a lot of her trajectory. And because it's set in high school, there's something funny and maybe a little cheeky to me about, like, because there's a way that I think this film is sort of quietly subversive. Like, it feels very like inviting and like you love these characters, you're just watching this thing. But even like the Cyrano piece, it's like it starts off seeming like it's Cyrano, but midway through, it really kind of goes off the rails of Cyrano, and it isn't Cyrano at all anymore. It becomes like you just are now in with these three characters. And it's like, what is going to happen, right? It turns out that like who gets the girl is not really the driving engine at that point. And similarly, like using all these various quotes, I think the goal was to sort of take like, and I was deliberately using these like classics of the Western canon, right? Like these like very much sort of straight male white, well, Oscar Wilde's not straight, but you know, these very sort of white male Western notions, because there's something very interesting to me about juxtaposing that against an Asian American face, right? And in terms of Plato's Symposium, that was when I was like, oh, I see, because in a lot of ways, it's like this whole notion of like finding your other half and finding the half that completes you, which I think is so beautifully stated in Plato's Symposium. And I think it's like one of the original myths that give us that. And it still carries through to today, right? Like if you read any magazine that has anything to do with love, right? Pretty much they're always talking about like, how do you find the one? Like the one is a big deal, right? Like all the quizzes you take on Cosmo are about like the one. And, you know, maybe it's just because I got older, but, you know, all through my 20s, I was like, oh, yes, this is super important. Like from the time I was a kid, I like watched Casablanca, I watched His Girl Friday. Like I was totally imbued with this idea that once I find the one, my life is complete, and that's like, you know, that's the pinnacle of life, right? But now that I've gotten older, like that is wonderful. There's like nothing wrong with like trying to pursue that. But I generally have discovered that even if that happens, and like I look around at other people or my friends, it doesn't really seem like after they get married, then life is just wonderful and then nothing else happens. It's like, and then your life continues on, right? And so I think it was interesting for me to start with, here's sort of like an origin myth of the one. And in a subtle way, by the end of this film, I'm going to hopefully disprove to you that that is the most important question in your life.
Mm-hmm. We are nearing 8 p.m. in New York, and I promised you guys that this is going to take an hour. So I'm going to try and, with your help, wrap things up. So if the two of you briefly, first of all, I want to wish the half of it lots and lots of luck. It's already been getting, I think, a lot of viewing on Netflix, and for the attendees, I hope that you will just pass the word and tell everybody how much you love the film and how great the filmmakers are and that they should watch it. But before we say goodbye, I would like to, for the two of you briefly, to tell us, because there are some questions about it, what is next for you as a director, writer, and as a producer. I think I'm going to start with the producer. Blair, hello. What's next for you?
Well, what is next?
Once you're able to work, once COVID is letting us get back to life.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's next for us is figuring out how we work safely in this post-COVID environment. And it's something I've been working on. I'm in a group called the New York Producers COVID Response Alliance, and we've come up with a set of safety guidelines for how to keep the cast and crew safe, and their suggestions. But we've been working on it a lot in the hopes that we can kind of get people in New York back to work, you know, as soon as we are allowed to. So given that, I have lots of different stuff going on. I have a bunch of different things in development, some features, some television shows that I've been developing. I'm looking for, you know, the right project for Alice. Alice is very, very specific. And I have a new production services company that I'm, you know, that was just about to launch before the pandemic happened. So, you know, I'm just going to kind of keep doing what I've been doing, which is hoping to work with good people on interesting projects, you know, regardless of budget level, regardless of things like that. I want to work with smart filmmakers. I want to tell good stories. And the thing I really want to do is work with people that I connect with, that I can help tell their stories. I feel like that's my skill, and that's what I enjoy doing. So fingers crossed I get to keep working on projects like The Half of It, because it was incredibly rewarding and very fulfilling for me. It was really, really great.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping for.
And the
No,
result
I
is
think
wonderful.
Blair's a kick-ass producer and just wears her heart on her sleeve, and is like one of the people who really like you can just see how she feels, which is such a boon. I think it's like such
Or
a
not.
boon.
Maybe it's not always.
No, I think it is a boon. I think for me, I actually greatly prefer to know what someone's really thinking, you know. And I think her body of work speaks for itself, though. If you look at like all the things that she's worked on, to be told, I mean, yes, I know I'm getting sent a lot of stuff, and I try and read what I can. But the truth with me is, like, I have a few of my own projects that maybe at some point, maybe one of them will get to a place I think it's worth showing. But what I most want is, after this month of like hardcore trying to get the word out there with this film, I probably just will totally disappear off the face of the earth, unplug, disappear off social media, sort of re-Alice myself. At the point I can, I really want to hug some people. And then, you know, I'll always sort of be working on something that matters to me, but I do sometimes feel like projects are a little bit out of my pay grade. It's like a little bit above my pay grade what's gonna hit, right? And if I'm lucky, maybe something will happen, but if not, you know, then I'll just be, I don't know, hanging out with my friends and eating food and writing. I guess that's basically what I'm doing.
I just want to end here saying, Lizel Escalon, just saying thank you, Meira, Alice, and Blair, for this thoughtful conversation about the half of it. So I think that's a very nice thing to end it with. Alice, it was so great to have you. Blair, always wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Netflix, for allowing us. Thank you, Netflix, for helping make the half of it. It's a wonderful film, and I hope it will have a very long life. For those of you who are with us in Zoom and Facebook Live, whose questions I did not get a chance to get to, I am sorry. But we did get to quite a few, and I'm glad we have done that. And please join us Thursday. We have Fisher Stevens, who's going to be talking about his work on films from series such as From the Tiger King to The Cove. I think those are very interesting juxtapositions. He's done incredible work as an actor and producer and director. And the following week, we'll have Oren Moverman and Ira Sachs and Bill Horberg, trifecta of filmmakers together, talking about the film that they made together, Married Life. So join us for that. And thank you again very much. Thank you, Naiwift.
Thank you, Mayura. Thanks for inviting us into the conversation. It's really special what you've put together in the Woodstock Film Festival, and it's so nice. I haven't got to see Alice or hug her for so long because we're all quarantined. So, all
right, group hug. Group hug.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
No, thank you so much.
Best of luck for everything.
All right. Bye.
Bye.